Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily short story. Now, before I start today's story, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this short story and any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers and at your local bookstore and local library if you requested, and you can order paperback copies from Amazon. Now, here's today's short story. I hope you enjoyed just as much as I did writing it.
Auld Alliance. The 6th of January 2023. Crete, Greece. MI6 intelligence officer Luca had always had a soft spot for the amazing country of Greece because of its sensational food, breathtaking history, and wonderful men. Greek men seriously knew how to have sex, so whenever Luca was summoned to Greece on MI6 business, he was hardly impressed, and he always wanted to execute his mission quickly and effectively. Anything to protect the amazing people of Greece, Europe, and the UK. Luca was walking along a very long sandy orange road that was so typical in Crete that all the damn roads just looked the same. Without his GPS, Luca honestly had no idea whatsoever if he would ever find his way around Crete. It was so massive for starters, and it wasn't exactly like there were many signs showing him the way to the beach he was heading to. And if the roads were bad enough, then the endless fields of olive trees and cacti lining the road without any little rock walls was just cruel. As beautiful as the olive trees were with their thin branches, rough bark, and gorgeous plump olives hanging off the trees, they too weren't helpful to him. He couldn't steal any olives because everyone on Crete and throughout Greece was poor now. So one stolen olive to give him strength could mean yet another Greek family struggling to provide food on the table. It really was that bad, sadly. Immense fiery orange hills made from solid crumbly rock seemed to rise out of the land in the distance. And that was what Luca really liked about Crete in a way, because it was a bit of a weird place. It could be a beautiful island filled with olive trees, beaches, and hot sexy Greek men, but it could also be filled with deadly rock hills and cacti. The air smelt wonderful of nature, sea salt and sweet olives that Luca was so tempted to steal, just so he could have the privilege of tasting some real Greek olive oil. But he couldn't yet because he had to focus on the mission. So now at least Luca sadly knew that the amazing taste of olive oil dipped in crusty buttery bread that forming on his tongue would have to do him for now. MI6 had sent Luca to Crete for a so-called secret and very simple mission, and Luca supposed that he should have realized instantly whenever a snobby desk jockey who hadn't done field work for 10 years said a mission was easy, it was going to be next to impossible. And this mission seriously was. Russian Federal Security Services had infiltrated Crete about 2 weeks ago, and the Greek government had thrown a lot of might to hunt down the Russians, but they all turned up dead. Thankfully, some Greek National Intelligence Service contacts leaked the news about the Russian threat to the international intelligence community, and as far as Luca knew, the UK was the only country to answer, but even that wasn't correct. Only Scotland, which was sadly part of the UK, had been the only country to answer so far. As a proud Scot, Luca had pressed MI6 to let him go to Crete for the past week because it was his duty to stop Russia and help protect Europe. Of course, the whole protecting Europe argument held no water with the English because as far as they were concerned, all Europeans were dirty, foul foreigners. But Luca managed to wear his bosses down enough, so they said yes to get rid of him. And they seriously wanted to with the rusty gun they had given him and the other equipment they hadn't given him. MI6 had refused to give him a single gadget, but they openly gave tons of gadgets to English agents. Now that really was discrimination, plain and simple. Luca stepped to one side on the long orange sandy road and waved as a banged-up Greek car rushed past. The car was so beaten, bruised, and mostly destroyed that Luca honestly couldn't tell for a moment what make the car was. It was just a sad fact that most people in Greece were so poor that it was all they could afford. At least using the information that a contact had given him in a local beautiful village in the nearby hills, Luca knew the Russians were located at a beach not far along this road, so all that Luca needed to do was get to the beach, kill the Russians, and recover any data he could. Because Russians didn't just infiltrate a nation for the fun of it. There had to be a plan afoot here, and Luca just knew that whatever that plan was, it would scare him a lot more than he ever wanted to admit. A damn bit more. DGSE Intelligence Officer Pierre Martin seriously didn't know what all the fuss was about with Crete, because he seriously loved the absolutely perfect Greek men. He loved Greek food more than life itself, and he was a real sucker for Greek history, but Crete. As far as Pierre was concerned, Crete was just a poor island that had been abandoned by mainland Greece, like so much of it, to suffer and decay into a wasteland. And as Pierre was walking down a painful long orange sandy road, he could really understand that whilst his French bosses had loved him for going to Crete to help out, they all acknowledged that it was a wasteland and the Russians were stupid for wanting to travel to this particular wasteland of Greece. It was just a shame that everyone in French intelligence knew that the Russians actually weren't stupid, and if they were here in Crete, then there was an excellent reason why. Pierre had phoned an ex-boyfriend at Europol to see if there was any top-secret information in Crete that would threaten European national security, and thankfully there wasn't. Apparently, there was something to do with the British on Crete a few years ago, but Pierre really didn't care about that. Not when a group of English people had beaten him up only last year when he was visiting London as a real tourist, not an intelligence officer, just because he was French, and the UK government had publicly said that the French were no friend of the UK. It was pathetic, but that was the world he lived in. Pierre did enjoy the breathtaking views of Crete, because it might have been an utter wasteland with nothing but olive trees, orange rocks, and cacti for as far as the eye could see, but it was relaxing in a strange way. It was even better that the air smelt of nature, olives, and sea salt. It was a perfect way to wake up the senses. And Pierre really knew his senses needed to be fully alert today. A small dot in the distance made Pierre frown because he knew that someone else was coming towards him. He just knew that someone was traveling on the same road as him. And even worse, whoever the little dot was, they could be a Russian agent. If that was the case, then they had to die. A few minutes later, the dot became visible, and Pierre just stopped. His heart felt like it was going to explode. His legs felt weak. His entire body ached. The man was absolutely gorgeous. Pierre had just stared at the man who was the dot as he walked towards him. And Pierre was seriously just stunned. There was no good way to do justice to the man's beauty. Pierre couldn't believe how perfect the man's longish brown hair was with its beautiful thickness, curls, and it was sheer perfection. Pierre wanted so badly to run his fingers through the man's hair, and the man's fit, sexy body in his skin-tight shorts, white shirt, and white trainers only amplified how amazing the man was. Before now, Pierre had had no idea a man could look this good in some shorts, shirt, and trainers. It was almost like the man was a god incarnate, like from the stories and myths from the ancient Greece. Pierre even supposed this could be the god Adonis himself. Then Pierre noticed the black rucksack on the man's bag, and he instantly knew it was made by a brand that worked exclusively for the UK government. He was a fucking intelligence officer. Damn it. And an English one at that. Pierre whipped out his pistol. It took Pierre a few moments to understand why the Adonis wasn't aiming his gun at him, but Pierre just grinned when he realized the hot Adonis was stunned by him too. "Who are you?" Pierre asked. The Adonis grinned like a cute little schoolboy for a moment. "Who are you?" DGSE Officer Pierre Martin. The Adonis nodded. "Good. The French have always been good to my wee country." Pierre just looked at the Adonis because his accent was perfectly English, just down to the little sounds and ways of speaking, unique to each region of England, so presumably this hottie had worked a lot in the southeast, maybe Kent itself. But the word "we" sounded like he had said it on purpose, and there was only one country in the entire place that was friendly with France and used the word "we" like that. "You're a Scot?" Pierre asked, unsure what to make of that. He had studied at university in history and learnt a ton about Scottish-French historical relations, including the treaty that protected both countries called the Auld Alliance, and how both modern-day governments continued to work on that powerful friendship despite the childishness of the UK government. "I am," the Adonis said, allowing more of his Scottish accent to come through. "And we are both here to kill the Russians, I take it. So why don't we crack on with it instead of standing around?" Pierre had to admit this man was so hot, and he was from MI6 probably, so he was highly trained, hot, and Pierre really did want to spend more time with him. "Fine," Pierre said. "I'm invoking the Auld Alliance. I'm Luca, and I'm pretty sure you cannot just invoke the Auld Alliance, and it was an alliance between our countries to protect us against English invasions." Pierre shrugged. "These are modern times, my friend, and treaties that were never revoked have to evolve. What do you say?" Pierre loved it how sexy Luca laughed and nodded his head, and both of them started walking quickly to the beach where the Russians were meant to be. And Pierre was seriously looking forward to getting to know this hottie a lot more. All they had to do first was survive dealing with some Russians. Luca couldn't believe how amazing Pierre was. He was so hot, clever, and just flat out amazing, and the past 30 minutes, the length of time it had taken them to get to the beach, had been simply magic. Luca felt like he really knew Pierre a lot better now, and he really liked what he knew. And it also helped that Pierre had an amazing ass, and Pierre had jokingly lifted up his great-looking white t-shirt earlier and revealed his sensational abs to Luca. So at least he also knew that Pierre had a great body underneath his touristic look. And thankfully the mission wasn't over yet, so Luca didn't have to say goodbye. Yet. Luca and Pierre knelt down on some hard orange rock on the road that leant down to the large sandy beach in front of them. There was a rather steep rocky ridge lining the semicircular beach with its dirty yellow sand, so that would give them a height advantage over the enemy. There was a group of 4 Russians in sand-colored t-shirts, trousers and army boots working on something in the middle of the beach. Every so often, the Russians looked up to see if anyone was around, but thankfully they hadn't spotted them just yet. The air smelt wonderful of sea salt, tea, and lamb kebabs, but that really troubled Luca a lot more than he wanted to admit, because none of the Russians had any kebabs on them. Luca felt the icy cold barrel of a gun against the back of his head. "Get up," a woman said in a harsh Russian accent. Luca and Pierre slowly stood up, and his entire stomach twisted into a painful knot at the very idea that something could happen to the stunning Frenchman next to him. Luca turned around and frowned at the very tall Russian with high cheekbones, black sunglasses, and a burnt cheek. She was definitely the leader, judging by her military medals hanging off her t-shirt, and Luca really didn't want to underestimate her. If these Russians were arrogant enough not to wear body armor when operating in enemy territory, then they were either extremely stupid or they were extremely deadly. Luca believed in the latter. Luca and Pierre followed the stupid Russian woman over to the other 4 Russians, who were all men, and the Russians just smiled at them like Luca and Pierre were nothing more than toys to play with. And toys to kill. Luca just wished he could have saved Pierre from this, but it was probably Pierre's beauty that had made Luca lose focus long enough for the Russian woman to sneak up behind him. "What are you doing?" the Russian woman asked. "No one is stupid enough to interfere with our plan, and the Greek government seems to be okay." "How the hell did you figure out that?" "It was the Greeks that sent us," Luca said. The Russian woman laughed. "A Scot pretending to be a Brit. That's funny even now as the English prepares to finish off Scotland." Luca just ignored the crazy Russian woman. He didn't doubt for a second she was telling the truth, but this wasn't a time to get passionate about his belief in Scottish independence. All 4 Russians took out their own pistols and pointed them at Luca and Pierre. Luca had to figure out a plan to save themselves. There were 4 highly trained Russians that were all armed, and there was only 2 of them, and the woman had taken their guns away. So the only solution here was psychological warfare, because at the end of the day, these were Russians, and Russian men hated taking orders from a so-called mere woman. "Whose daughter is she?" Luca asked the Russian men. "You can't tell me a Russian woman actually earned the right to lead a mission." The men said nothing. The woman punched Luca in the throat. "Do you know, most of the Russian prisoners in France are all women? It seems if a woman leads a mission, then it is doomed," Pierre said. Luca was seriously starting to fall for this hot, sexy man. The woman kicked Luca in the balls. Crippling pain filled him, but it was worth the prize if it kept Europe safe. "See how she slashes out to prove how weak she is," Luca said. "Shut up. Shut up," the woman shouted. Luca just looked at her, as the woman aimed her pistol at his head, but her hands were shaking so much that any bullet would miss him. A shot went off. The woman's head popped. All 4 Russian men pointed their guns at Pierre and Luca, as he quickly realized that it just might have been safer to keep the woman alive because she might have been saner than the men. Because that was almost a universal truth. Women were a lot saner than men most of the time. "Now then, English," a Russian said. "You will help us open this box or the frog, as you say, dies." Luca absolutely hated this Russian git. He had no problem with the English, but he was Scottish, not English, and he had no problem with the French, so he didn't need to call them foul names. All Luca wanted to do was protect Pierre, so that meant playing along a little longer, and just hoping that he couldn't get them killed in the process. Not a very tall order at all. As one of the 4 Russian men placed Pierre in a very weak headlock, Pierre wanted nothing more than to simply slaughter these little Russian boys. Not because they were threatening him, or because they were threatening sexy Luca, but because of their sheer stinky smell. It was disgusting. "Unlock the box," the Russian man said with an eye that didn't work properly. Pierre hadn't really looked at what foul thing the Russians were working on throughout all of this. He had been focusing way too much on the sexy Scot next to him, and then focusing on that dumb Russian woman. Now Pierre just frowned at the very high-tech looking metal briefcase that seemed to have some kind of biometric lock on the front of it, requiring someone to place their fingerprint and a DNA sample on the lock to open it. It was strange that such an item would be found here, but it was a well-kept secret amongst the British intelligence agencies that Pierre had hacked his way into, that they did scatter a series of boxes throughout Europe before Brexit to act as caches for their agents in case they were ever in trouble. This was clearly one of them. And Pierre guessed that it was probably hard enough to get the boxes into these European countries, let alone retrieve them after Brexit. So the boxes were simply abandoned. But why did the Russians want this one? "I can't," Luca said. "It won't open for me." The headlock around Pierre got a lot tighter. He was still sure he could break it, but he needed the other 3 Russians distracted first. "Fine," Luca said. "I'll try, but it won't end well." Pierre hated it, as Luca knelt down on the hot orange sand, pressed his finger against the biometric lock, and even spat on it too. The box hissed a little, and it seemed like it was going to refuse being opened. Pierre had no idea how it worked, but right now he just needed to kill the Russians and escape. And as much as he loved France, he knew they would want him to retrieve whatever was in the English box, but he couldn't do that to Luca. The box buzzed open. A Russian kicked Luca out the way. All 3 Russians rushed over to the box, and the man with the bad eye smiled as he held up a thick paper folder and just glared at Luca. "You see," the man said, "this folder contains all the information you would need to blackmail the UK government. It exposes their corruption, their illegal ops, and even an assassination on French soil." Pierre felt his stomach twist in pain. He had heard the rumors of MI6 using Europe as its Wild West background, but it was impossible to believe it was true. It clearly was. This would allow you to blackmail the UK government into giving the Scottish people a choice about your future. Become an independent country or not. "This folder is the key to your future," the Russian said. Luca just laughed. Pierre noticed the man holding him wasn't steady on his feet, and thankfully it wouldn't take much to knock him over. Pierre just needed to feel where the man kept his gun. On the left or right side. Scotland will be free through legal means. No blackmail. No corruption. No nothing, Luca said. And we would never work with the Russians. The Russians shook their heads. Fine. It was worth a shot. Kill them, the man said. There wasn't time to find the gun. Pierre jumped backwards, knocking the man over. The man opened his arms. Pierre rolled away, climbing on top of the Russian, snapping his neck. Pierre grabbed his gun, rolled forward, jumped up. A Russian flew at him. Pierre shot him in the head. Another Russian tackled Pierre. The man threw sand at Pierre. The sand caught in his eyes. Pierre was blinded. The man slammed his fists into Pierre. The man whacked Pierre around the face. Pierre tried to block. He couldn't see the punches. Blood gushed out of Pierre's mouth. His vision cleared. Pierre ducked. The man didn't expect that. He overshot the punch, giving Pierre an opening. He took it, slamming his fists on the man's chin. Teeth shattered. The man leapt forward. Pierre's head landed on the sand. The man pushed him down. Pierre started sinking. His head sunk into the sand. Pierre struggled. Pierre felt the man. He felt his fingers go into the man's mouth, between his cheek and teeth. Pierre pulled as hard as he could, ripping the man's cheek from his mouth. The man screamed. Pierre pushed himself up. He slammed his fists into the man. The man fell over. The man threw sand again. Pierre dodged it. The man slammed Pierre in the balls. Pierre collapsed in crippling pain. The man kicked Pierre in the head. Pierre lost 2 teeth. More blood gushed out his mouth. Pierre was in agony. The man whipped out a knife. He charged at Pierre. Pierre rolled over. The man didn't expect that. Pierre tripped him over. The man screamed. He fell on the knife. The knife slashed the man's throat. A bullet shot went off, and Pierre shot up and froze. He couldn't have his sexy Luca dead. Luca just couldn't be dead. He couldn't lose him. Pierre spun around and sunk to his knees again, in sheer relief that his strong, beautiful, perfect Luca was standing a few meters away with a few marks and cuts and bruises, with a dead Russian at his feet. All the Russians were dead now, and finally Pierre understood exactly what they had come for, and as much as Pierre wanted to know what exactly was in that folder, Pierre just knew that him and Luca had to decide together. Partly because of the Auld alliance, but also because it meant spending just a little or wee more time with such a hot Adonis. A man that Pierre seriously wanted to get to know a lot better. Luca just held Pierre's strong, sexy, and very firm body as they both sat on the orange sand, staring out over the oddly peaceful Aegean Sea with 4 Russian corpses behind him. Luca really loved the amazing coolness, refreshing, and sheer heat of the air, and there had to be some sea salt in the delightful air that made the taste of fish and chips form on his tongue like he used to have with his family when they holidayed to England once or twice. There was something so peaceful, relaxing, and simply brilliant about sitting here on a Cretan beach with no one else for miles around, and with a hot, sexy Frenchman in his arms. Luca hadn't exactly known what to expect when he had first hugged and held Pierre, but he really was perfect. His body was firm, he had a great six-pack, and his skin was smooth, silky, and tasted perfect as Luca had kissed his injuries gently earlier. Something they had both laughed about for a little while, before they just silently agreed to enjoy the moments they had left together. It was a sad truth that all those boxes were fitted with trackers, so when one of them was opened, MI6 was notified, so Luca just knew that sooner or later some British commandos would show up to help him, so Pierre had to be gone by then. Yet until then, the 2 sexy men just wanted to spend a tiny bit more time together, and Luca just looked at the beautiful injured Frenchman in his arms. "Do you want to take anything?" Luca asked, grinning. Pierre smiled. "Oh, believe me, the DGSE would love me for any intelligence for blackmail against the English, but I respect you too much for that." Luca just shook his head, because Pierre really did care about him. "Just take it. Scotland will be fine without illegal blackmail and committing crimes. The British Empire has fallen all over the world. So much of the empire is free, and many former colonies are more successful than the UK. So Scotland will follow in time." Luca loved it when Pierre looked at him, and Luca got to stare into his stunning eyes. "Let the English take the folders when they come for you," Pierre said. France doesn't need it, but I can't say I won't need you. It hardly seems fair we only have a few minutes together. Luca wasn't sure what he was talking about there. Then he noticed there was a little black speedboat coming across the horizon, and Luca just frowned and rolled his eyes. We will meet again, and if you're ever in Scotland or the UK, find me and I'll show you a great time. Pierre laughed as they both stood up. You have clearly never had sex with a Frenchman. We can beat you Scots at sex any day. Luca just kissed Pierre and savored every single precious second of that hot, passionate kiss, and the flavor of his soft, silky lips, and the sheer electricity that was flowing between them with such intensity that Luca was wondering if they would both be electrocuted. A fate that Luca might have preferred, instead of being apart from him. We will meet again, my Adonis, Pierre said. As you said, my adore, Luca said. The Auld alliance demands it. As Pierre ran off, and the sound of the speedboat got louder and louder, Luca just loved listening to the sweet lyrical laughter of Pierre. Not just an intelligence officer for a foreign power. Not just an intelligence rival that was apparently a threat to UK national security, but a beautiful, sexy, and clever potential boyfriend that Luca seriously looked forward to meeting again. And it was just amazing to Luca that it was all only possible because some alliance made hundreds of years ago. Now, that really was a beautiful thing.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.